Farmer sees elderly woman tied up with vultures waiting, so he does this. Comment what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10 and let me know what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better. So please subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The dense October fog covered the pastures of Stone Creek County like an icy blanket when Arthur Ainsworth awoke abruptly at 3 in the morning. At 67, the farmer was a light sleeper, a habit from a lifetime in the countryside. But something different was troubling him that night. A strange noise was coming from the farthest pasture of his property, where he usually let his cattle graze freely. Arthur rose from the bed with aching bones, put on his old boots and grabbed his flashlight. His natural stubbornness prevented him from ignoring anything strange on his lands. After 40 years of looking after that farm alone, ever since his Eleanor passed from this world, he had developed a sixth sense for danger. The walk across the property took 20 minutes, with the flashlight cutting through the dense darkness. The biting October chill penetrated his old jacket, making him shiver. The pastures seemed different that dawn, as if a strange presence had invaded his property. It was when he reached the foot of the ancient tree that Arthur stopped dead, unable to believe what he saw. An elderly woman was tied to the trunk of the old oak, completely unconscious. Vultures circled low above her, as if waiting for something terrible to happen. "Good Lord," Arthur murmured, running towards the woman. His hands trembled as he untied the thick ropes that bound her to the tree trunk. Her skin was cold, but she was still breathing. She was a lady of about 73, with messy grey hair and simple but clean clothes. When he finally freed her, he carried her in his arms to his house, fighting against the weight and his own age. The woman remained unconscious, murmuring incomprehensible words. Arthur placed her on the living room sofa, covered her with blankets, and tried to warm her with hot tea. After 2 hours, she finally opened her eyes. They were blue, frightened, and confused. She looked around Arthur's simple living room as if she recognized nothing, then fixed her gaze on him in terror. She asked in a hoarse voice where she was and who he was. He introduced himself as Arthur Ainsworth, explaining that he had found her tied to a tree in his pasture and asked how she'd gotten there. The woman put her hands to her head, trying to remember. She said she couldn't remember anything, that her name was Dorothy Miller, a retired nurse, but she didn't know how she had arrived there. He asked if she remembered anyone who might want to harm her. Dorothy shook her head, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't remember anything, only that she had been very afraid of something before she fainted. Arthur made strong coffee in the kitchen, thinking about what to do. He had no phone at home, and the town was 10 miles away. Dorothy seemed harmless, but he couldn't stop thinking about how she had ended up tied up on his property. He asked if Dorothy had any family, anyone who might be looking for her. She replied that she had a little granddaughter, her eyes filling with tears. Lily was 4 years old and had lived with her ever since her mother, ever since they were left alone. He asked where they lived. "In town," she said, "in a small house near the central square." But she didn't know if Lily was okay and was afraid something had happened to her. Arthur's heart ached. A 4-year-old child could be home alone, waiting for a grandmother who hadn't returned. He decided that in the morning he would go to town to investigate the situation. For the rest of the dawn, Dorothy slept on the sofa while Arthur stayed awake, watching through the window. Something about this situation didn't make sense. Who would tie an elderly lady to an isolated tree, and why? When the sun rose over the hills of Stone Creek County, Arthur prepared a simple breakfast for Dorothy. She seemed calmer, but was still shaky and confused about how she'd gotten there. She said she was going to get her granddaughter and tried to stand up. Arthur replied firmly that she was in no condition to go anywhere, and that he would go to town to check if she was okay. She said she didn't trust strangers looking after Lily. Arthur told her that someone had tried to harm her yesterday, and it might be dangerous for her to show up in town now. Dorothy fell silent, processing Arthur's words. He was right. If someone had tried to hurt her, they might try again. So she decided they would go together. The trip to town was tense. Dorothy pointed the way to a small, simple house near the central square. When they arrived, they found the door locked and no sign of movement. Arthur forced the old lock and entered first. The house was empty, but there were signs that someone had left in a hurry. Clothes were scattered, a pan with burnt food was on the stove, and toys were thrown on the floor. Dorothy cried out for Lily, running through the small rooms asking where she was, but the girl was gone. Dorothy's desperation echoed through the empty house like the cry of a wounded animal. Arthur held her by the shoulders, trying to calm her as she ran from one room to another, shouting her granddaughter's name. "Lily! Lily! Grandma's back!" But only silence answered. The small house told a story of a hasty departure. In the kitchen, Arthur found a rag doll on the floor next to a broken cup. In the bedroom, the child's clothes were gone, but Dorothy's remained in the wardrobe. "Someone took her," Dorothy whispered, collapsing into an old chair. "Someone came in here and took my little girl." Arthur examined the back door and found pry marks on the wood. Whoever had entered the house didn't care about hiding their tracks. He asked if Dorothy remembered having any enemies, anyone who would want to harm her. She replied that she was just a retired nurse who had spent her life caring for sick people, and wondered who would do this to an old woman and a child. Arthur noticed something strange in Dorothy's wardrobe. Among her simple clothes, there was a small vial of expensive medication hidden in the back of a drawer. He recognized the name of the medicine. It was the same one Eleanor had taken in her last months of life, an imported remedy that cost a fortune. He asked Dorothy if she took this medication. She looked at the vial in Arthur's hands and turned pale. She said she didn't know where it came from and had never seen that medication before. He told her it was very expensive and only wealthy people could afford it. She explained that she didn't have money for that, living on a small pension and some caregiving jobs she did from time to time. Arthur put the vial in his pocket. Something very strange was happening, and that medication was an important clue. They decided to return to the farm when they heard voices on the street. Through the window, Arthur saw 3 men approaching the house, wearing dark suits despite the morning heat. They didn't look like ordinary people from the town. He whispered to Dorothy that they should leave through the back. They escaped through the back door and walked through the alleyways until they reached the truck. During the entire trip back, Dorothy cried silently, worried about her granddaughter's safety. At the farm, Arthur prepared lunch while Dorothy rested on the sofa. She seemed exhausted, but gradually began to recover fragments of her memory. She said during the meal that she remembered working for a wealthy family in recent months, for Mrs. Clementine Vanderbilt. She was very old, almost 90, and needed special care. Arthur knew the name. The Vanderbilts owned the largest agricultural estates in the region, a powerful family that controlled much of the local economy. He asked what happened with that job. She explained that she was suddenly dismissed without explanation. Norbert, Mrs. Clementine's son, showed up one morning and said her services were no longer needed, but it was strange because Mrs. Clementine was very fond of her. He asked when that happened. 3 days ago, she replied. That same day, she had taken Lily to a neighbor's house because Norbert said she had to leave the property immediately. Arthur thought about the timeline of events. Dorothy was dismissed 3 days ago, and yesterday he found her tied to the tree. It couldn't be a coincidence. He asked if Dorothy had seen anything at the Vanderbilts' house that she shouldn't have. She was silent for a long moment, as if struggling with a disturbing memory. She said there was something strange about Mrs. Clementine's medications. Norbert always controlled what she took, but sometimes she found her more drowsy than usual, as if she were taking larger doses than prescribed. He asked if she had told anyone about this. She said she tried to talk to the family doctor, Dr. Sebastian, but he said she was imagining things and that retired nurses sometimes get paranoid. Arthur felt they were getting to the core of the problem. If Dorothy had discovered something compromising about Norbert Vanderbilt, it would explain both her dismissal and the attempt to silence her forever. That afternoon, they received an unexpected visitor. Beatrice Higgins, Arthur's neighbor, appeared at the door with a curious and malicious expression. At 58, she was known in the region for spreading gossip and meddling in other people's lives. She said she heard Arthur had brought a woman to live with him. Looking at Dorothy with suspicion, Arthur explained that Mrs. Dorothy was here because she needed help. "That's what you say," Beatrice replied, "but people in town are saying you kidnapped an old woman, that she was screaming for help in your pasture." Dorothy was visibly shaken by the accusation. Arthur felt his anger rise, but controlled himself. He told Beatrice she knew very well he wouldn't hurt a fly. Beatrice said she didn't know about that he'd been living out here alone for years, and maybe had become a bit strange. After Beatrice left, Arthur realized they would face serious problems. If the rumors spread, the community could turn against them before they found out the truth about what happened to Dorothy. Dorothy said sadly that maybe she should leave, as she didn't want to cause trouble. Arthur insisted she wasn't going anywhere while her granddaughter was missing, and while whoever did this to her was still free. That night, Arthur made a makeshift bed for Dorothy in the guest room. She seemed calmer, but he noticed she constantly checked the windows and doors, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Before sleeping, she thanked Arthur for helping her when no one else would. He replied that she would have done the same for him. She asked how he could be so sure. He said it was because she had kind eyes, just like his Eleanor. It was then that Dorothy asked a question that left Arthur speechless. "Was Eleanor your wife? What was her full name?" He answered Eleanor Miller Ainsworth and asked why. Dorothy's face turned completely pale. She said her maiden name was Miller, and that Eleanor was her sister. The silence that followed Dorothy's revelation was deafening. Arthur stood frozen in the doorway, as if he had been punched in the stomach. His mind struggled to process the information. The woman he had saved was his late wife's sister. He murmured that it couldn't be true, that Eleanor had never told him she had a sister. Dorothy explained they were separated as children, their parents leaving them with different families during the Great Drought of '62. She was 12 and Eleanor was only 8, and they never saw each other again. Arthur sat heavily in the chair beside the bed. Eleanor had always said she had no family, that she was alone in the world when they married. "She probably thought I had passed away," Dorothy said. "The family that took me in moved to this county, and I completely lost contact with our hometown. The revelation changed everything. Dorothy was not just a stranger he had saved. She was his sister-in-law, family." Arthur felt a confusing mix of joy at finding a lost piece of Eleanor and sadness knowing his wife had lived, believing she was all alone in the world. He said Eleanor had a birthmark on her right shoulder, testing the story's truthfulness. "In the shape of a crescent moon," Dorothy completed, "and a small scar on her chin from when she fell from the apple tree at age 6. Arthur closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the confirmation. It was true. Dorothy was really Eleanor's sister. He asked why they never tried to find each other. She explained she had tried for years, but their family was very poor and lacked the resources to search. After she got married and had her children, life became too difficult. He asked about her children. She said she had 2, but lost her husband in an accident when they were young. Her daughter passed away very young, leaving Lily with her. Her son. Her voice broke. Her son disappeared 30 years ago, and they never knew what happened to him. Arthur's heart ached. Dorothy had gone through so much loss, So much suffering, and now she was losing her granddaughter too. He asked for her son's name. Anthony, she said. Anthony Miller. He was 22 when he disappeared, working on a farm near Kingston. The name sparked a distant memory in Arthur. In the 1990s, he had temporarily hired a young man named Anthony for the harvest, a hard-working and honest boy who had suddenly disappeared without explanation. But now was not the time to explore those memories. They had more urgent problems to solve. The next morning, Arthur woke to the sound of approaching engines. Through the window, he saw 2 black cars stopping at the entrance of his property. Well-dressed men got out of the vehicles, and among them, he recognized Norbert Vanderbilt. He whispered to Dorothy to hide in the cellar, telling her it was the Vanderbilts. Dorothy paled and ran to the makeshift hiding place. Arthur straightened his clothes and went out to meet the unwanted visitors. Norbert Vanderbilt was a man of 52, tall and burly, with small, calculating eyes. He wore a suit too expensive for the local weather and had the look of a man accustomed to getting everything he wanted. He greeted Mr. Ainsworth with a fake smile and said he had come to get his employee. Arthur asked what employee. Norbert said it was Dorothy Miller, that he knew she was there because a lady from town had seen her in his truck yesterday. Arthur claimed he didn't know what he was talking about. Norbert signaled to his men, who began to spread out across the property as if they owned the place. He told Ainsworth not to be difficult, that Dorothy was his mother's caregiver who had left without permission and needed to return immediately. Arthur asked why, if she worked for him, he hadn't looked for her at her own house. Norbert replied that it was because she wasn't there, and also because he heard she had been spreading lies about their family. Arthur crossed his arms, standing firm, and asked what kind of lies. Norbert claimed she was saying they were mistreating his mother, nonsense from a woman who was becoming senile. Arthur questioned why he would bother coming all the way out there if it was just nonsense. Norbert's mask of cordiality began to slip. He said it was because he wouldn't tolerate disloyal employees spreading gossip that could harm their reputation. One of Norbert's men approached and whispered something in his ear. The wealthy man's face hardened even more. His men hadn't found her in the house, but they knew she was there. Arthur told them to search all they wanted, praying that Dorothy would remain hidden. While the men searched his house, Norbert approached Arthur with a threatening expression. He told Ainsworth he would be clear, that the woman saw things she shouldn't have, and if she appeared in town spreading stories, he would have problems too. Arthur asked what kind of problems. Norbert stated that he owed the agricultural bank a considerable amount on the farm's mortgage, and that it would be a shame if they suddenly decided to call in the debt. Arthur's blood ran cold. How did Norbert know about his financial problems? And more importantly, how did he have influence over the bank? Arthur asked if he was being threatened. Norbert said he was offering a solution. Hand over Dorothy, and he would ensure the debt was renegotiated with better terms. And if he refused, then, Norbert said, he would find out that stubborn people have a habit of losing everything they have very quickly. The men returned from the search empty-handed. Norbert dismissed them with an impatient gesture. He told Ainsworth to think carefully about his proposal, and that he had until tomorrow to give him an answer. After the cars disappeared down the dusty road, Arthur rushed to release Dorothy from the cellar. She was shaking, clearly terrified. She murmured that he said she saw things she shouldn't have seen. She told Arthur she remembered now. She remembered what happened at the Vanderbilt house. He asked what she saw. She explained that Norbert was forging documents, papers from Clementine's inheritance. He was transferring all the properties to his name while keeping his mother doped up with sedatives. Arthur asked if she was sure. She said she saw him forging her signature several times, and one night she overheard him on the phone talking about selling the lands to a mining company, saying the old woman was almost out of the way. Arthur understood the gravity of the situation. If Dorothy had discovered a fraud scheme against an elderly lady, Norbert would do anything to silence her. That's why they tried to kill her and why they took Lily to control her. That afternoon, as they planned their next move, they heard a soft knock on the door. Arthur looked through the window and was surprised to see a well-dressed young woman holding a file of documents. Dorothy asked who she was. Arthur said he had no idea. He opened the door cautiously. The woman was about 28, with brown hair tied in a professional bun and eyes that seemed familiar somehow. She introduced herself as Isabella Morgan, a lawyer, and said she needed to speak with Mrs. Dorothy Miller urgently. He asked how she knew she was there. She explained that she had been investigating Norbert Vanderbilt for months, and Dorothy was the witness she was looking for. Isabella entered the house and looked directly at Dorothy. She said, "Mrs. Dorothy, you are my biological mother." Isabella's revelation struck the room like a lightning bolt on a sunny day. Dorothy clutched her chest as if she couldn't breathe, while Arthur watched the scene, unable to fully process what was happening. Dorothy whispered that it couldn't be true, studying the young lawyer's face. She had given her daughter up for adoption 28 years ago and never knew what happened to her. The lawyer explained that her birth name was Maria Dorothy, but her adoptive parents named her Isabella and showed some documents from her folder. She had spent years searching for her biological mother and found her name in the adoption records 6 months ago. Arthur watched the two women slowly recognize each other. Isabella had the same blue eyes as Dorothy and the same facial shape. The resemblance was undeniable. Dorothy asked, with tears streaming down her face, why she had only come looking for her now. Isabella explained that when she finally found out where she lived, she learned she was working for the Vanderbilts, and since she was investigating Norbert for contract fraud, she couldn't approach without putting her in danger. Dorothy asked if she knew he was doing wrong things. Isabella said she found out by chance, representing some small farmers who were forced to sell their lands for negligible prices. All the contracts had passed through Norbert's hands, and there were suspicious irregularities in all of them. Isabella spread documents on the kitchen table. Arthur recognized some names. They were his neighbors who had lost their properties in the last 2 years. She continued, explaining that Norbert uses inside information from the bank to identify farmers in financial distress, then manipulates the debts to force foreclosure, buying the lands for a fraction of their real value. Arthur asked if that was legal, thinking of his own situation. Isabella confirmed it was completely illegal, but Norbert had powerful contacts who covered up his actions, which is why she needed a witness who had seen his criminal activities up close. Dorothy stood up, pacing nervously. She told her daughter she didn't understand the danger she was in, that this man had tried to kill her, and now held her granddaughter hostage. Isabella calmly stated that Lily was not with the Vanderbilts and that she knew where she was. Both Dorothy and Arthur turned to her in shock. Dorothy desperately asked what she meant. Isabella explained that when she heard Norbert had suddenly dismissed her, she started watching her. She saw when the men broke into her house and took Lily, and she managed to follow them. Dorothy asked where her granddaughter was. In a safe place, Isabella replied. She had friends who handled cases like this, and Lily was being protected while they gathered evidence against Norbert. Dorothy collapsed into the chair, relieved, but still trembling. She asked if she was okay, if they had hurt her. Isabella reassured her that she was scared, but physically fine, and asked for her grandma all the time. Arthur felt immense relief, but it was quickly replaced by concern for the next steps. He asked why she hadn't acted sooner if she already had Lily safe. She explained that she needed solid evidence about the fraud against Mrs. Clementine. Otherwise, Norbert would use his influence to get away with the accusations. Isabella looked directly at Dorothy. "Mother, I need you to tell me exactly what you saw at the Vanderbilt house." The word mother made Dorothy even more emotional. She said she saw Norbert drugging Mrs. Clementine with excessive doses of sedatives, and then, when she was unconscious, he would forge her signature on documents. Isabella asked what kind of documents. Transfers of property, powers of attorney, wills, Dorothy answered. She once saw him altering the will to leave everything in his name. Isabella asked if she had any proof. Dorothy thought for a moment and said she had photographed some documents with her old phone, but the phone was left at the Vanderbilt house when she was dismissed. Isabella said they needed to retrieve that phone, as those photos could be the key to taking Norbert down. Arthur protested that it was impossible, that the Vanderbilt property was like a fortress with guards, cameras, and an electric fence. "Not if we go in the right way," Isabella said mysteriously. Just then, they heard the sound of an approaching car. Arthur looked out the window and saw a vehicle he didn't recognize, an old blue sedan driven by an elderly woman. Isabella asked if they were expecting anyone else. Arthur said no, grabbing his hunting rifle as a precaution. The woman who got out of the car was very old, wearing a simple dress and leaning on a cane. She walked slowly to the door and knocked gently. When Arthur opened it, he was shocked to recognize the visitor's face, though aged and frail. "Mrs. Clementine," she said. "Mr. Ainsworth, I need to speak with Dorothy urgently. I know she is here." Clementine Vanderbilt entered the house, staggering, clearly weak, but with her eyes shining with lucidity. When she saw Dorothy, her eyes filled with tears. "My dear," she said, "I thought you had abandoned me." Dorothy exclaimed, "Mrs. Clementine, how did you get here?" "I escaped from my own home," the old lady said, sitting heavily in a chair. "Norbert doesn't know I've regained my lucidity. I've been pretending to be drugged to find out what he's doing." Isabella introduced herself as a lawyer, but Clementine interrupted her. "I know who you are, girl. You're Dorothy's daughter. I saw you when you visited our property last month, pretending to be a salesperson. You knew." Clementine replied, "I'm old, not foolish. And I also know my son has been stealing my inheritance for years." Clementine opened her handbag and took out a small key. "This is the key to my personal safe. Inside, I have copies of all the original documents Norbert altered, and also Dorothy's phone." Dorothy asked why she kept the phone. "Because I saw you photographing the papers," she said. "I knew that one day those photos would be important. I hid the device before Norbert could destroy it." Isabella took the key with trembling hands. "With this evidence, I can bring Norbert down completely. But there's a problem," Clementine said gravely. "Norbert has discovered I've escaped. He's probably already coming after me." As if her words were prophetic, the sound of several approaching cars echoed across the property. This time, there were 4 vehicles, and Arthur could see armed men getting out of them. "He brought thugs," Arthur said, checking his rifle. "Resisting with violence won't work," Isabella said. "There are too many of them." Clementine stood up with difficulty, leaning on her cane. "Let me handle my son, Mrs. Clementine. You're in no condition to face this situation." "I'm in better condition than you think," she replied. The lady went to the front door, but before leaving, she turned to Dorothy. "My dear, there's something you need to know about your son, Anthony. He didn't disappear as you think." Dorothy froze. "What do you mean?" "Anthony has been secretly working for me for 30 years, investigating Norbert's first frauds. That's why he had to fake his disappearance, to protect you and the family. My son is alive. Not only alive, he's been here in this county for years, using another name, and you two already know each other." Clementine looked directly at Arthur, who turned completely pale as he understood the implication. "Arthur Ainsworth isn't your real name, is it, Anthony? If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much."